This week on The Inquiry, we're asking, why is there still a war in Yemen?
Part 1. The Seeds of Conflict.
The fighting at its most basic level stems from who controls territory, power and resources.
The fertile lands of Yemen have long drawn the envious gaze of foreign powers. The country boasts abundant natural resources, including copper and oil. To its west lie the waters that connect the Suez Canal to the Indian Ocean. Our first expert witness is Elisabeth Kendall, Senior Research Fellow in Arabic and Islamic Studies at Oxford University's Pembroke College.
Yemen is situated in that corner of the Arabian Peninsula that has about 2,000 kilometres of coastline. But most importantly, that bit around Aden, that controls the access to the Red Sea. So that's a really important shipping route.
For over a century, Yemen's southern port of Aden was controlled by foreign powers. First Britain from the late 1800s, then the Soviet Union. Meanwhile, Yemen's north was part of the Ottoman Empire. When that fell 100 years ago, North Yemen eventually became a country in its own right, and some years later joined up with the south.
Yemen is a relatively new state. It only unified into what we now call Yemen in 1990. But originally it was a collection of smaller sultanates, emirates, sheikdoms, and in the north, an imamate. And there's been a long history of local, regional, and indeed foreign agendas that have all played into different conflicts over the past century and a half.
It's a history dominated by the agenda of foreign powers. But after the collapse of the Soviet Union, there was the prospect of bringing the two lands together as one nation.
There was a lot of international pressure to unify the country, and there were incentives for many local leaders to get on with this and unify Yemen. But the idea was that resources would be split equally, that there would be investment equally around the different areas of Yemen, and that never happened.
In 1990, Yemenis from the pro-Soviet South and pro-Western North celebrated the birth of their new country. Fireworks lit the skies. On the streets there were thousands of people clapping and cheering. The new Republic of Yemen would dominate access to the Red Sea and become a powerful producer of oil. A nation the size of France, it was also the region's poorest. And disagreements over who should control it have plagued it ever since.
And that unification in 1990 was held by many to really favour the north and to favour northern domination of the south. And that feeling has never really gone away. There's always been resentment, and that's still right up there at the forefront of politics today.
The president of the north became the president of the new larger country, and Ali Abdullah Saleh kept a lid on the country's domestic tensions and himself in power by playing one group off against the other.
Saleh was a very skilled leader. One of the most famous sayings he has about how to control politics is dancing on the heads of snakes. And what he means by that is keeping one faction down while another one comes up and then switching it so that everyone's bought in to him staying in power. And he also managed to get the support of Western powers because he played the terrorism card so adeptly. You know, if I'm not in power, then look at what might break loose.
Saleh was president of the new Republic of Yemen for 2 decades. But when the Arab Spring swept through the region, even his political cunning couldn't save him from being ousted. In 2012, he was replaced by his deputy, Abdrabba Mansour Hadi. But the change of leadership was far from the democracy many Yemenis had hoped for.
So Hadi was not really a legitimate leader. There was no choice. As a sole candidate, it was really the international powers who had put him forward for that role. To many in Yemen, the government just looked like the same old elites. And so it didn't really solve anything.
Resentments continued to simmer. Then, in 2014, two events led to the eruption of violence. The first was dramatic hikes in the price of fuel, which led to widespread protests. The second, perhaps even more significant, was a plan to divide the country into administrative areas, with boundaries that left a rebel group in the north completely isolated. The rebel group was called the Houthis, and it turned out to be a dreadful mistake.
And that map of federal regions, this draft, left the Houthis with no oil, no gas, no seaport, completely landlocked. And it also squashed hopes of southern secession, so it pleased very few, apart from the international consultants and the committee members themselves, and of course the old elites.
It was the final trigger for war. President Hadi was swiftly overthrown.
The Houthis took the opportunity to enter Sana'a and take over the capital in September 2014. They rode this wave of discontent, the popular protests, poor utilities, rampant corruption, price hikes. So that really was what pushed the Houthis over into taking full control.
The conflict that followed has continued to rage for over 7 years, with the Houthis remaining in control of the capital Sana'a in the north. The fighting has cost the lives of over 1/3 people, and many blame other countries in the region for allowing it to keep going.